Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're gathered during Black History Month, and I love to read week as well. So it's not just about a celebration of a moment, it's actually a reminder that Black stories, Black brilliance, Black imagination is here. It's living, it's breathing, and it's also ongoing. So I'm really grateful to be here with Zilla and the rest of you as well. So again, thank you for being here. The World So Wide, this book, it's not just a novel, it's a reckoning. It's also a reclaiming and a naming as well. When I was reading this book, the main character, Felicity, she became less and less of a character and more of someone that you were getting to know, actually. And someone that was always searching. She was resilient as well. And she was constantly negotiating who she was or who she was supposed to be or allowed to be versus who she actually got to know herself to be. So, with that said, let's get into it.
All right, let's go.
So, when Felicity tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Tell my story," how was that for you? Well, what was that moment for you?
So I think I always had her or version of her present with me for a good part of my life. As you heard, this book does center around the Grenada Revolution. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but maybe a quick history lesson for those who don't know and a refresher for those who do. So the island of Grenada is in the Eastern Caribbean, like near the bottom of the Caribbean, and very small island, just about 100,000 people, and was a colony of Great Britain, and then had this premier that was the local leader who was kind of a dictator and was killing people that disagreed with him. And then in 1974, the island becomes independent from Great Britain, but Gary is still in charge and he ramps up his repression. And so some young Grenadians who were studying abroad decided to remove him from power and bring in a socialist government that would actually do good for the people. And so they did that in 1979. They were able to remove him from power without violence, but not through democratic means. They basically just told him to leave. And they had some guns and they didn't use them, but when they saw the guns, everybody ran. So then this government comes in, the new dual movement, and they said they were Marxist Leninists, but if you look at what they were actually doing, it was more of a socialist mixed government because there was still private industry allowed, there was still churches that were operating, but they did nationalize a lot of the industries and they actually did really well in increasing agriculture, increasing literacy, improving the social state of the island. But then in 1983, they had an internal coup by a faction of the movement who wanted to be more Marxist-Leninist and closer to Russia. Cuba was very involved in all of this as they were supporting the revolution. And when this second coup happened, it was violent. The leader, Maurice Bishop, who was beloved by the people, was murdered along with 7 other cabinet ministers and supporters. And the US took that as the opportunity to come in and invade. They had been having issues with Grenada for a while. And they then came in October 1983, they invaded and removed the NJM or the new revolutionary government from power and brought in the government they wanted to have. And ever since then, Grenada has basically been a neoliberal US following country. So that was kind of the premise. And so the reason that I was brought into that personally with Felicity, to answer your question, was that my mom was involved in the Grenada Revolution in the sense that when she was a student and she was living in London, in England, which is where I was born, my mom and my aunt were there, and they were very involved in social movements in general. So they were highly involved in the anti-apartheid movement, protesting South African apartheid, and they were involved in the anti-colonial movement in the global South, including the Caribbean, and they were involved in anti-racism and anti-nuclear bombs and kind of all these protests that were happening. And they knew Maurice Bishop because he was also part of that. He would come to their house. He was friendly with them, as were many of the other Grenadian revolutionaries. And in fact, Maurice Bishop and my cousin were dating for quite a while. And then he ultimately ended up marrying his wife Angela, who's not my cousin, and going back to Grenada. So I always knew this story from my mom, and she would always say, oh, I wonder how it would have been if they would have been married. And then her husband was executed. And so I always sort of had this sense of pathos for this woman that was kind of left behind from this movement, but also kind of dodged a bullet at the same time, literally, right? So she became Felicity as the years went by. And so I was kind of like, I want to write this woman, but because I grew up in the Caribbean diaspora and not there, and I wasn't present for any of this is all stuff I'm hearing about kind of after the fact as a child, I didn't feel that it was my story to tell as a Grenadian revolutionary that lived in Grenada, because I never did that. But I did feel as a mixed race person in the diaspora that we have a story to tell that connects to this. And so that's who I made Felicity. And then I also made her an opera singer. Yeah. And so that kind of happened because I was studying opera at the time and kind of seeing from the inside that it still has a lot of classism and elitism and racism and sexism, which the book gets into. So I wanted to write about somebody that was dealing with that. And then I also wanted to write about Grenada. And I had them kind of as two separate things. And then I realized the tap on the shoulder was, it's the same story. And it can actually go together. And you might not think that the story of an opera singer dealing with, patriarchal conductors has anything to do with this Grenada Revolution, but in my mind, they did. And so it became a story of what is the place of art in a revolution.
Right. Beautifully written, by the way. Yeah. You mentioned, because in this book it moves through cities, right? And you mentioned Grenada. So Grenada, Winnipeg, right? And London as well. So
and New York.
And New York, yes. So the book moves through cities, countries, and emotional climate, right? I did not say climax, I said climate. There's a lot in here.
There's climate too.
Yeah, there is in here. Which landscape changed you the most, and which one transformed you?
I mean, I think they all did, and they were all ones that I was familiar with in different ways. So obviously, I live in Winnipeg, so that's home now. As I said, I was born in the UK, so I know UK and London very well. Grenada, part of the Caribbean, part of my heritage going back. My husband's family is Grenadian. Many of my family are connected to Grenada. So New York City, I have a lot of family there and spent a lot of time there. It's a kind of a Caribbean second city, right? We're a huge diaspora city. So they were all places that I love and have loved ones and connections to. But I think that Grenada is probably the most transformative, just because to me that's the heart of the story. And I know we're here for International Development Week, and so one of the things that has always kind of haunted me is that gap between Western countries and the global South, and why that is. And that was just something that as a child I just always used to just question, why do some countries have so much and some countries have so little, and why when you go with your family to the Caribbean do they live differently, and why don't they have what we have? And the more I learned about colonialism and all these forms of exploitation, the reasons for that, that was always something that bothered me. And Grenada's revolution was special to all the people of the Caribbean and to, I think, people all around the global South and Black people everywhere, because it challenged that narrative. So this was a small, colonialized, poor country that was standing up and saying, we are not, I think the leader, Maurice Bishop, said, we are not anyone's backyard and we are not anyone's lake. Because that was what the U.S. always says, right? This is our backyard. And no, we're not your backyard. We are our own nation. We have our own aspirations. We have our own dreams. And it's separate from what you want to do to us or with us. And so that was something really profound, I think. And even though it might seem like that revolution was crushed, there are still people in Grenada that very much keep it alive. And so one of the things I found when I was researching was the people in Grenada that still have the revolutionary flags up or still talk about the revolution with pride and love, and there's interviews you can listen to with them. And so that was a whole piece that I didn't really understand, because I think the dominant narrative is always that In fact, in Grenada, they celebrate the day the US arrived as Thanksgiving Day. And so officially, this is a good day because the US came in and rescued the nation. But there's a lot of people that reject that narrative. You don't hear them. It's a voice you don't hear because the dominant voice is that, we're America's friend now. And there are many people that still hold that candle for that independence, that revolution. So knowing that, I think, was just really inspiring that there are still people in this tiny nation that hope for more, and hopefully someday, right, there will be justice and there will be some movement towards some of those goals that they had.
Yes. When it comes to identity, let's talk about identity. Identity, legacy, and global citizenship. Felicity embodies the in-between. So she embodies Black and white, Canadian and Grenadian, right? Artist and activist. What truth were you trying to name through her identity?
So I think she defies those boundaries. So I think,
very well.
Yeah. So I think the truth was that she often is made to feel like she has to choose one of or both of those. So she can't be a singer and an activist, and she can't be a Black person in a white world, and she can't be a woman in a man's world, and she doesn't really belong in Canada, but when she goes to Grenada, she doesn't really belong there. So she's always left to feel like she doesn't have a place in the world. But what I was trying to show, obviously, is that she does, and that she is connected through her history and through the struggle and through her art and what she does, that is part of the revolution, and it is necessary, and who she is very much needed in that movement. And that, yes, there are people that need to go with the guns and fight, but there's also people that need to tell the stories, and she can do that through music and through her presence and through just being there in that space as a Black woman. She is claiming that space, and so I think it was very important for me to have her stand up at the end of the novel and take that space for herself and take it for the rest of us. So yeah,
she did stand up for herself very well. This story crosses borders in every possible way, right? Mm-hmm. Emotionally, culturally, political. How do you see Felicity and perhaps yourself as a global citizen navigating responsibility, identity, and belonging?
So I think that the concept of global citizenship, again, has to do, first of all, with awareness. So just learning more about the world and some of the inequalities and the way that it works. So I think a lot of people hear colonialism these days and they tune out, right? Like it's become kind of a buzzword where people think that it's just like lefties like complaining, or they think that it's something that happened a really long time ago. So I think, as we know, like my mom was a colonial citizen and grew up in that time. Like colonialism's only been gone for like 40, 50 years and less in some countries. And some parts of the Caribbean still are colonies, right? Like I was in Martinique this past summer. It's part of France. It's still a colony. And there is a strong anti-colonial movement there. But you don't hear about it. So from here, it seems like they're all happy. But when I was talking to some of the people there, they were saying, oh yeah, like we had a protest last year and the government shut it down and like arrested people, or, like this is still happening. So this is not ancient history that happened to your great-great-great-great-grandparents. Like it happened to your parents. My mom went to colonial schools where they would actually decide if you were light-skinned enough to come into the school or not. And so all of this has traumatized people, obviously, and they're still dealing with that legacy. So I think global citizenship is understanding that and reckoning with that and understanding our part in it and our place in it and how it's affected or impacted us, or how it has affected or impacted the people we know. We've had it in Canada, we've had it in countries where people come to Canada from somewhere else. Canada has done it. Canada has been imperial. Canada didn't have colonies per se, but Canada has definitely exploited other countries, continues to. So understanding that and giving space to that and giving voice to that and telling those stories and allowing those people to be heard, I think is really important. And so Felicity certainly learns a lot because she doesn't know much about any of this. Her mom doesn't tell her much about it because she's traumatized and she's trying to move on from that. And Felicity has to learn the story of Grenada and her people and what they went through. And in doing that, once you know, then you can go and tell other people. So she's then able to share those stories. So I think that even just reading books about that is a really good way that we can all be global citizens. So I mean, there's my book, but there's a lot of other books too that you can read. I know there's some on the website for MCIC. I understand there's some at the back. Read African writers, read Indian writers, read Asian writers, read Palestinian writers, just read. It's like one of the best things you can do, and you learn so much from doing that.
Perfect. Yes. And it is read to week, read
Yes.
to read.
I love to read.
I love to read.
We all love to
That
read,
part.
right? So
That part.
yeah, there's so many, like there's more books than ever that you can read about so many things, and so that's always whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction, and then tell people what you
Share
liked,
it.
share
Yeah,
it,
share
and
it.
promote those authors, promote those books, promote those ideas.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So the idea of home, it shows up in memory, longing, sometimes estrangement. How do you define home in your life?
That is a difficult question for me, just like Felicity, just because I have existed in so many spaces and I belong to so many spaces. So I don't really feel that I have one home, which in a way that's, I guess, sad, but it's also liberating because everywhere is also my home. So there's also, 10, 20 places in the world that I can go and feel at home because I will have people there. I will have a history connecting me there. So I guess I do really think of myself as a global citizen in that sense, because I am a diaspora person and multiple diasporas, not just one. Like I know I went to Ghana in Africa 2 years ago, and that was my first time there.
I remember.
Yeah, you probably saw my socials.
Yes.
And that was actually through the Canada Council as a grant for my next book, which we might talk about later. And so that involved going to Ghana. And some of my ancestry goes back to Ghana on my mom's side. So I knew that we did this DNA test and we saw Ashanti people of Ghana. And so when I went there to research enslavement and kind of the diaspora of my ancestors, when people in Ghana would know that I'm from Canada, and then we get into the story, and then they would all say, "Welcome home."
Right.
Welcome home to Ghana, because they have this thing in Ghana called the Year of Return, where they welcome in enslaved descendants and do a tour. So it's a very developed industry that they have there. And when they said "Welcome home," I never knew if they meant it or if it's just like what they tell them they're supposed to say to us. Because yes, it felt like home, but it also didn't feel like home, right? Because I mean, it's a place that I've been gone for a long time. I've been mixed a lot of other different things since then. I've never lived there. I'm a stranger there, right? But at the same time, in a way, it does feel like coming home. So it's always that kind of disconnect of like half being there, half not being there. And that's sort of how I feel in every place. So I think that's just part of the reality of being a global citizen, I guess.
Perfectly said. I feel that way sometimes too. Yeah.
Yeah. Like sometimes I'm like, yes, like Winnipeg, like I'm so connected to it, and like I'll defend it to the hilt, and then sometimes you just are like, what am I doing here? Especially when it's cold, right? Like it's -40, you're just like, this is not my place, right? So it's always this kind of push and pull of like, where am I supposed to be, right? And then you go back to like Caribbean or something, and yes, you like everybody welcome, but at the same time you're like, could I actually live here? Like I don't know if I could live here, right?
True.
So you start missing stuff in Canada. So you're just always like looking outward to somewhere else, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think that is just normal. I think for a lot of us,
it is.
like immigrant people or immigrant descendants.
When it comes to art, and I'm married to an artist, art as power, right? Voice as liberation. Opera isn't just music in the story. I realize that now. It's power. It's resistance. It's claiming space. And Felicity did a very good job of that. What does voice mean to you on a soul level?
So I think voice is so many different things. Your voice is literally how you express yourself and how you're heard by the world, whether it's as a singer or just speak like what we're doing right now, having a conversation, right? Like that is how you pass on ideas. So without people's voices, there would be no stories. The first stories were all spoken, right? Writing came later. So we needed to be able to use our voices before we learn to kind of capture those in other ways, whether it's through art or writing or music or whatever. So to me, the voice is kind of what makes us human. That is what's different about us compared to like pretty much any other creature, right? Like animals make noises, they sing, they chirp, they bark, they make noises all the time. And it has meaning to them, right? Like what they're saying does have a purpose, but they don't tell stories in the same way that people do, right? Like an animal might bark like danger or something, you know, might have an immediate meaning, but they don't necessarily have that ability as far as we know. I mean, maybe they do, but I don't think they go back and like do like oral history like the way that we can. So I think it is really just such an integral part of our humanity and what makes us connected to each other.
Yes. And speaking of that, how do you see art working as a tool for liberation, especially within the Black and Caribbean communities today?
I think that's one of the big questions of the book, is that art always has been very central to social revolutions in general, and definitely in the Black community. So I mean, we all know the protest songs that have been used over time. When you think of the anti-apartheid movement, right, you think of like Free Nelson Mandela, right? If people know that song that were around when that was out, that song was huge. And just in making a song that says Free Nelson Mandela, you kind of capture that whole longing and urgency of that movement to free him. People that were around in the 60s probably know like We Shall Overcome, or, you know, the songs that were sung. So people sang while they were being beaten, while they were being chased by dogs. When you watch some of the videos from South Africa, people were being chased and they were singing like beautifully. Like South African singing is amazing. It's so gorgeous, like their protest singing. Same thing with African Americans, right? Like people would be sitting in jail and they're singing. Because it keeps up the spirits, it unites people, it gives them a purpose, it gives them something to do, it sends a message, it helps your voice carry further. It does so many things. So it is, I think, highly important and central to most movements. There will be chanting and singing. You know, you see in Minneapolis, right? People are chanting and singing when they're protesting down there. To not, you know, like what protest is silent, right? To have a silent protest. I mean, sometimes people will do that as a statement and have a silent protest, but generally a protest has a vocalization and singing as part of it. And that is really what Felicity taps into, is that, okay, so like that's not opera, but how do you bring that into opera? And she finds a way to do that, where she can actually sing opera in a way that is subversive, and sing opera in a way that represents, and sing opera in a way that connects and has meaning beyond herself and something greater than her. And so that is something I think she's kind of a metaphor for everybody finding their purpose, or finding something that they can connect to that's bigger than them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be opera, but whatever you do, there's a grander purpose to it, and there's a way to do that with meaning and intention, and find that.
Perfect. When it comes to revolution, truth, courage, and justice, you write about that in the book in terms of revolution, and you call it revel, though, in the book, right? So when you write about revolution with intimacy, nuance, emotional precision, what courage was required from you to do this?
So the revel was what the Grenadians called their revolution, because revolution is a big word, and they said they need a small word for small island. So it was known as the revel, and people would say to the revel is kind of like their rallying cry, and that appears in the book. So that is what Bishop and his comrades called themselves, that they were having a revel. Yeah, like I think honestly, like I think any work of art that you create and put out there's a level of vulnerability, obviously, in doing that. For a musician, there is when you step onto a stage. For a writer, when you put your book out there and hope people will read it. For artists, when they hang up their art. We spend all this time, sort of working on a craft by ourselves, and it takes a lot of time and dedication and hard work to write a book or to do any kind of art. And yeah, sometimes you have this sense of like, why am I putting all this time into something that might not matter, that nobody might care about, that might be just a vanity project, or just ego, or just self delusion. And then you get to the point where you put it out there and you have an event and you don't know if anyone's going to come, right? Like, I mean, there is sort of that level of vulnerability, I think, that does take a lot of courage to move past, and then to actually tell the truth as you see it is also, I think, a type of courage, because sometimes the truths are hard. Like, there are things in this book that maybe aren't pretty all the time, aren't what people want. Like, I think you and I were talking about, I didn't want that to happen at the end, right? Like you have to make sad things happen. You have to kill off people you like. You have to show violence. You have to show sexual violence. If these are things that happen, and these are truths that need to be talked about, but at the same time, you know that people are going to feel triggered by it. People are going to maybe feel offended by it. There's always that possibility that somebody will read into it. And so you just have to do it anyway. I think that the beautiful thing about art is there's always an audience for it, and the right people will find the book. And I've been really fortunate, I think, with my book that people have found it, that have appreciated it. And one of my favorite things about actually writing this book and putting it out there is the conversations with readers. So I will sometimes get messages or emails from people I don't know that have read it and just have to tell me what they thought, or ask me questions, or give me their feedback. And that's so exciting sometimes it happens in person if you go out somewhere, to know that somebody actually took the time to read it and formulate their thoughts and reach out with their thoughts. I think that's such a gift. So I always thank all the readers for that everywhere. And I'm sure there's some here today, and it'll be very exciting to hear from you. And I think that's what artists want, right? Is to make a connection with your art, with other people. And so I think, but it does take that courage of putting yourself out there to see if that will happen. And especially with a book, you can't go back and rewrite it. So at least, like, say if you're a musician and you have like one bad performance, you can like go practice and get better and then like try again. But a book, like, I'm not rewriting this, like, this is what it is. So just that moment of saying, okay, like, no more editing, like, it's gone. It's out there, like, the deadline's here. There's that moment of, I don't know. And then whatever happens is kind of out of your hands from there. So now it's not my book, it's everyone's book. So I think the other thing that's really cool is that if 20 people read this, they'll have 20 different perspectives on it. No one ever reads it the same way. And it's not necessarily what I intended either, right? So you lose that control of, like, well, I went this when I wrote my book, because it now becomes the reader's book too.
Right. The Grenadian Revolution, right?
Yeah.
It brings questions of justice, power, fragile institutions to the forefront. Mm-hmm. Okay? What parallels do you see between the historical movement and the challenges of communities faced today?
I think that was one of the big things as I was writing this book. I'm like, it's historical fiction. It happens in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but it's about now. And I think all good historical fiction is as much about now as it is about the time the author's writing about. And that's kind of why I think people gravitate to it, is because we understand, I think, instinctually that history repeats itself. And so when we're reading history, we're either trying to learn from it or we're trying to get perspective on it because it's still happening today. Very much, I think, institutions are an issue here, because I had said before, the Grenada Revolution took power without elections. And this was kind of one of the thorns in its side, because the US and England and Canada were really big on having elections, having democracy, because that's their big value, and which is interesting now, right? And so Grenada was saying, well, we don't want to have elections until we can find a way to do it in a way that is reflective of our culture and our values, because we don't want to just adopt US-style election in Grenada. We want to see if there's a way that we can reach consensus or figure out who's going to take power. And it may not look like your elections. And in fact, this is another part where my family connection comes in, because my uncle was actually a constitutional advisor to that government, and he was telling them, wait a bit, don't have an election right now, like, figure it out. So they were looking for the space to do that, but continually being pressured by the US, like you're not democratic, why don't you have an election? So at the same time, though, because they had this pressure from the US, they became, in some ways, the revolution became repressive, because there were about 3,000 people that were jailed in Richmond Hill Prison in Grenada because they were deemed to be counter-revolutionaries. So what they did is they had issues with the CIA, there was a belief that the CIA was trying to infiltrate the revolution. The CIA has denied that. I think they're still waiting to get some documents to determine what happened, but there was this widespread belief in Grenada that the CIA is trying to destabilize us, and so they were always looking for spies, and they actually brought in a law saying that you can't spread rumors because that was seen as being destabilizing to the revolution. So people that were thought to be spies or engaging in this behavior were thrown in jail. And so there was a faction of people who were very angry at Maurice Bishop, and some of their descendants still are. Like I was actually just reading the other day online that one of the guys was talking about that had been in jail. He has a website and he has like all his grievances against the revo, like still being talked about. I think this is still very much an issue. Grenada is still very much part of their life and their conversation, while the rest of the world has forgotten about it, because they kind of hadn't put together those institutions or those checks and balances before they took power. They were left a bit vulnerable because they were having some of these issues with rights violations. They didn't really have a mechanism where you could go and protest that. They didn't really have a strong court system or things like that, because colonialism had not allowed them that opportunity to set it up, and they didn't get a chance to do it before the US came in. So there was kind of this void, and there was sort of this, I guess they kind of legitimized taking power by force, right? Because when you come into power by force and then you don't do anything to kind of dissuade people from that, then the next guys are going to think they can come in and take power by force, which is what they did. So there was kind of this legitimization of violence because there weren't the institutions to counteract that. And so I think that was one of the parts that was hard too, right? Because I grew up with this very positive view of the revo, and I just said that it gave people pride and gave small nations standing, but at the same time, like it was wrong in some ways. It wasn't perfect. And so I think having to acknowledge that and kind of, I'm like, well, I can't leave that out of the book. I have to include both sides, right? So I did have a scene in there, as you probably saw, where they were talking about a lot of the people got detained were Rastafarians who had been detained. Like, this guy that has the website is a Rastafarian, and they were considered to be counter-revolutionaries because they had this ideology. Rastafarians are not loyal to the Caribbean, like they're loyal to Africa. So they see the Caribbean as Babylon. And so they aren't necessarily, they're not mainstream, right? They have this different ideology that is outside the mainstream and outside sort of the middle class values. And so they were seen as being enemies and were detained. And so I talked about that a little bit in the book, and how there was some laxity. They were also very young. So these revolutionaries were in their 20s and 30s when they came into power. Maurice Bishop died at 36. So they were very young and inexperienced, and so they didn't have that institutional memory. But then we come to today, right? So we've got the US, which has this long history of, supposedly being this democracy. I think we see how fragile it really is, because it only takes one leader to come in and destabilize things, and now we've got US elections being attacked. And US talking about, well, maybe the Republicans should run the elections, right? I just heard that yesterday, that was being said, that one political party should run the elections for everybody. And this constant delegitimization of US elections, even though there's really no evidence that they're not legitimate. And so you kind of realize that a constitution has to be a living document. Like, just as a piece of paper, it's kind of worthless. I remember learning that actually in law school. We looked at a whole bunch of constitutions, and one of the best ones, like on paper, if you just read it, wow, this is a great constitution, Uganda. Lovely country, lovely people, but we're not going to say they're constitutional shining light, right? Like, that's where gay people can be killed. And yet, if you read their constitution, it talks about equality and how people are all worthy and should be treated this way. But because the government doesn't honor that and does other things, the paper is worthless. And so the US has this great constitution as well, right? But now they're not showing respect for their own constitution. So I think that what this book kind of says about now is that there's always, I think this is very much a world where might makes right. And we just saw that again with the US going to Venezuela, which is in this region, just a little bit south of Grenada. And if we want to take your leader out, we'll take your leader out. And that's always happened, right? Like, Venezuela was not the first time. So again, growing up in my house with my family involved in these movements, Salvador Allende in Chile, Castro was like, they tried to kill Castro many times, right? Like what happened in Haiti with various people coming in, Nicaragua. So there are many countries in Latin America where regime change was forced upon them. And again, but then when they try to do it themselves, it's not okay because it's the people with the guns that have the power. So I don't think that's changed all that much. And it's very relevant to today still that these things happen. So I think remembering Grenada is very important.
So in terms of resilience, let's talk about resilience. Resilience without performative strength. So Felicity, her resilience. But you wrote about it not in that strong black woman carrying everything kind of way, which I appreciate. How were you intentional about crafting resilience that didn't sacrifice her humanity?
Yes, and I think that's a really good way of putting it because I think that I was trying to avoid stereotypes and caricatures in this book, and I think that there is, as you said, there is kind of that stereotype of like, well, you know, black women just like work hard and just like get it done. And not to say she doesn't do that, but she's also like a very like emotionally vulnerable person in a way that maybe isn't typical. And she is also somebody that makes a lot of mistakes. And she's somebody that doesn't always like herself. And she's somebody that doesn't always treat other people well. And she's very flawed. She's a very, very flawed person and very traumatized in a lot of ways. And I think what she shows is that even being all of those things, you can still make a positive impact on the people around you. So I kind of like had as part of her character, her parallel character is Musetta from the opera La Boheme. So when we go into the world of opera, so I don't know how many people have seen La Boheme. I was just here this spring. We were both on the Mantua Opera like Black Advisory Committee for that. But Musetta is the girlfriend of one of the characters, and she is of Marcello, and she is very selfish. She's very egocentric. She's very narcissistic. She is unfaithful, she is a flirt, she's a lot of the things that Felicity is. And for most of the opera, she's a complete pain in the butt. And then at the very end, Mimi, who's the main character, she's dying of TB and she doesn't have any money. And Musetta takes her fur and she goes and sells it and she brings medicine for Mimi, but it's too late because she's dying. But she makes a very selfless act to help somebody. So you see this person who's been just this very annoying sort of pick-me girl, turning into the most selfless character in the opera. And Mimi's response to her is, "You are a good person, Musetta." Because, everybody always thought she wasn't, but she had that goodness in her, right? And it came out when she saw someone in need. And so Felicity has two moments like that in the book where she is selfless and puts aside what she wants and who she is to help somebody that needs help, both of them being other Black women, who she generally is like pretty antagonistic toward. But in these two moments, she's like, I'm going to help these women who need help. And she does that. So despite being so flawed and so selfish and all these other things, she has that goodness in her. So I think I wanted her to show all of us, right? That all of us have good and bad in us. And that is what makes us human. And it's okay, right? Like a lot of this book kind of celebrates the bad, right? Like it's okay to celebrate the villain sometimes, right? Like it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to acknowledge that. And that's one of the things I find in some books. I think as Black women writers, we're often expected to keep our characters in a very narrow kind of trope where they can't do like really outrageous things and they can't be promiscuous and they can't be mean, because then it will stereotype all Black women as being that. So you're not supposed to do that, right? So that was one thing that I kind of bucked, that I want to let my characters have the same range that male writers have when they write their characters. They can be messy, right? And male writers write messy characters all the time. But for women writers, I think especially women of color, I think there's often this kind of unspoken idea that your character has to be this role model, and they don't, right? They can just be a person. And so that was kind of what I was like, she's very messy.
Very messy.
But in that mess, you come to the good,
yes,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. If someone closes this book and whispers one truth to themselves, what do you hope that truth would be?
Well, I think this comes to what I said about how I think every reader will read it differently for themselves. So I don't know if I feel comfortable kind of imposing mine on them, because I think what their truth should be is what the book does for them, right? So like every person will find something different in it, right? But I think that if there's one thing I hope would stay with people, it's just that they would sort of remember the untold stories and just start looking around for like the things that are hidden or the things that are maybe not as apparent on the surface, or like what's the story behind this, or what is the human element to this. But whatever that looks like for you will be different, and I think that's okay, and like I love hearing what that is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what I noticed about you, and through this book as well, you have a creative spirit. So what surprised you about your own voice while you were writing this book?
I think just that I was able to actually do this, right? Because it's your first book, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And when I started writing it, I had no reason to believe that any publisher will take this book and make it look like this and have it, you know, in your hand, or that I'll ever be here talking to a room of people about this book. Like, I had no understanding or belief of that. I was just writing something on my computer that was just a long document, right? And so I think, you know, there's points where you, like, maybe are discouraged or just don't have time to finish it or just don't really know, like, where it's going. So I think I just learned about my own resilience and my own voice, right? That I am someone who can write a novel, and I did it. And
You did a good job.
Yeah, like that was very like exciting to kind of realize. Like, you get to a point where you're like, I'm actually gonna finish this now, right? And then it was just like, let's cruise to the end, right? But it takes a while to get to that point. So yeah, I think I was just very. It was something I always wanted to do, and it just took me a while to actually sit down and do it. And yeah, I'm just really glad I did.
I'm glad you had the courage to write this book. I'm telling you, once you pick it up, you're not going to be able to put it down, I swear. I promise.